You ever have one of those mornings where the air feels ordinary and then, in the span of a handful of minutes, you realize everything you thought was yours has been borrowed and not politely? I pulled into my driveway, keys in my hand, and there it was, my garage lights blazing, music so loud the mailboxes were rattling, and half the neighborhood in there laughing like they own the place. My workbench, where I'd spent 20 years shuffling wrenches and polishing a bike that belonged to my grandfather, had been turned into a drink table. Someone had set my toolbox out like a prop. That's when I understood two things. They didn't respect me, and the woman leading it, Marla Whitcomb, didn't think she had to. Marla ran the Maple Ridge Homeowners Association like it was a country club, and she'd been appointed queen. She wore the kind of smile that said she'd already written the story of everyone else in town, and none of it included your side. When I stepped through the driveway, she looked up, smiled that brittle smile, and said, "Oh good, you found your way. We're having a community open house." She called it community like it meant something wholesome. It felt like a takeover. I told her, calm at first, that the garage was private property. She shrugged, made a joke about community resources, and the crowd laughed politely, the same politeness a rooster gets when it crows at sunrise and folks pretend it's charming. I'll be honest, I froze. Not because I didn't want to do something I wanted to shout, to shove, maybe even to break something, but because I knew how those confrontations went in Maple Ridge. You raise your voice, you risk looking unhinged, you risk getting the side eye from neighbors who are tired of conflict and prefer quiet. So I took the breath my father taught me to take, the one that calmed his hands when he fixed things on the farm, and I started collecting evidence instead of fury. There's a difference between being angry and being effective. I knew the HOA had a book of bylaws, and someone like Marla loved the smell of bylaws more than she loved neighborly kindness. So I photographed everything, the flyers with my street listed as the venue, the people using my workbench, the open beer cans near my tools. I talked quietly to one or two neighbors who weren't sure why they were there. They'd been roped in by Marla's charm and free food. One by one, a pattern emerged. Marla had been pushing limits for months, using the HOA's authority to expand her control, nudging lines, and watching whose objections fell silent. That night I sat in my garage with the bike under the light, and I thought about ownership, not the deed on paper, but what it meant to have a place where your memories live. The garage wasn't just wood and metal. It had my history glued to every shelf. I thought about how easy it had been for Marla to rewrite the neighborhood script. So I made a decision, not to retaliate in the heat of the moment, but to outlast her in a way that would be unmistakable. Preparation sounds antiseptic, but it's really the slow work of being deliberate. I read through county records, not because I wanted to be a legal scholar, but because someone with tenacity and a coffee habit can find inconvenient truths. I dug up a survey from decades ago and found a thin line on the map, a strip of land near the clubhouse that, if you followed it with a careful finger, belonged to my property. It wasn't sexy, but it was leverage. More importantly, I kept documenting. Cameras on the eaves, timestamps on footage, notes of every interaction where Marla stretched her reach. I also did something people don't talk about much. I practiced restraint. I let Marla think she'd won. She'd beam, patrol the neighborhood like a mayor, and gather her allies. It was almost comical. She threw a welcome party at my garage weeks later, and the crowd cheered when she bragged about creating community spaces. I smiled in the footage and listened as she sneered. Some people just need leadership. She made it easy. Her arrogance grew like a weed. When the bigger event came, the one with banners and a borrowed band, I didn't storm in. I had already alerted a couple of neighbors who were quietly tired of being steamrolled. I had the county survey ready, the timestamps lined up, and a simple plan to force the moment into daylight. I owned the facts. I just needed the facts to be seen where they mattered. It started with a locked door. Not the violent, dramatic slamming moment you see in movies, but a quiet move. The security system I'd installed earlier, legally, simply activated. Suddenly, the clubhouse doors and my garage keypad engaged in a way nobody expected. Phones buzzed with panic. Laughter turned to questions. Marla's smile froze, the crown slipping a degree. People tried to laugh it off at first, cracked jokes. But the jokes thinned when calls to emergency services met with the reality that this was more than a party prank. Cameras had been running for weeks. The footage was clear. We had recorded Marla telling a volunteer to handle a neighbor who protested. We had flyers showing a private address used as an HOA venue. We had the old survey that quietly contradicted the HOA's assumption of ownership. When officers arrived, they weren't the same ones who'd once shrugged at neighbor disputes. This time the record framed the dispute differently. The footage reframed the narrative. This was not just a naughty joke. It was a pattern of overreach and misrepresentation. We had neighbors on camera saying they felt pressured to go along with Marla because she implied consequences otherwise. That changed the tenor of the conversation. Power, when shown, can be checked. Because I'd taken care to build the case slowly, the confrontation at the next HOA meeting felt inevitable, like two tectonic plates finally colliding. I showed up with a stack of printed maps, the county survey, the timestamps, and a voice I kept steady because rage doesn't persuade the county clerk. Marla tried her old tactics, the interruptions, the staged compassion, the "we're all family" line. But now, instead of isolating me, her behavior isolated her. Some of her allies shifted in their seats. A few who had once laughed at my fix-it quietness now leaned in, embarrassed. When I played the clip where she instructed a volunteer to make an example of someone who complained, the room went silent. The room that had cheered her a month ago now watched her deflate. Here's the part that made heads turn: the survey. It showed the strip of land adjacent to the clubhouse belonged to my property line years before the HOA claimed it. It wasn't glamorous, it was a sliver on a map, but it was concrete. I didn't shout, "I told you so." I unfolded the map slowly, the way you might unfurl an old family letter, and I let the silence do its work. That little piece of paper did what shouting never could. It rearranged the power dynamics. Marla's fall wasn't cinematic in the way a movie makes villains explode. It was quieter: the resignation of authority, the slow dismantling of bylaws that had been bent, neighbors asking hard questions for the first time, and a county inspector scheduling follow-ups. There were hearings, there were apologies staged for the cameras, and there were consequences that felt to me like justice measured, not vindictiveness. The neighborhood's voice became louder where it had been silent, and in the space that opened up, people who'd been pushed aside found they could speak. But I'd be lying if I said everything stitched back neatly. After the formalities, there was awkwardness at block parties, invitations that subtly omitted certain names, and a shelf of mistrust that didn't vanish overnight. I fixed the garage door, put the bike back where it belonged, and kept the cameras not out of spite, but out of the lesson I'd learned: watchfulness trumps assumptions. I took pride in restoring the space, not as a monument to a victory, but as a reminder that tending to your life matters. What I keep thinking about is how power often dresses itself up as helpfulness, and how people will follow a polished voice because it's easier than asking hard questions. Marla's authority thrived because complaining took energy, and fear of being ostracized is real. My path wasn't heroic, it was patient, tedious, and sometimes lonely. The satisfaction wasn't in locking them in or gloating. It was in watching a community wake up and realize that rules can be used as shields or swords. So here's the messy ending, the part one like because it's honest. Marla stepped down, some bylaws were rewritten, and we agreed on clearer boundaries. But in the afternoons, I still catch neighbors glancing at the garage like it's new territory to be negotiated. People talk. People gossip. Power doesn't die, it adapts. I still keep a map in my desk drawer. I still keep my eyes open. If you've ever had something you love treated like a prop, tell me, what did you do? Was patience your answer, or did you burn the book? Do you think I was right to play the long game? Or should I have confronted her the first morning with a shout? Drop your thoughts below. Tell me where you stand on community versus control. And if you've lived next to someone who confused leadership with ownership, share that too, I want to read it. If this story made you think about boundaries where you live, share it with someone who needs to hear it. We'll talk about who gets to run our neighborhoods and whether community should ever mean one person's idea of what's best.